Hello class, Dr. Jeffress here, and I'm going to do another video lecture. This time we're going to talk about persuasive speaking. Your next speech assignment will be to do a persuasive speech. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Let me just share my screen. Get to the right place here. Here we go. That's not the one I want to do. Got to be the next one. Here we go. All right, so we're going to talk about speaking to persuade, and we'll start by looking at the goals of persuasive speaking. Obviously, we're trying to win over our listeners. When you're doing an informative speech, you're just trying to give information. And so you're just presenting it. You hope that the audience will listen and take it and learn something from it. But with persuasive speaking, the stakes are higher. You're really wanting to get the audience to accept your information, not just pay attention, not just understand it, but act on it. So that means the ethical stakes are higher. You need to know your subject thoroughly, right? If you're going to really be able to persuade someone, then you've got to be an expert. You got to know what you're talking about, and you know the need for credibility, right? To be able to answer questions, right? Alleviate fears, right? That, calm the anxiety that your audience may have about whatever you're asking them to do, right? So you need to know your subject thoroughly and be able to answer all the questions. You got to maintain a high standard of ethical behavior. Think about this, you are asking people to make a change. You're asking them maybe to give money, to donate their time, to donate their resources. You're asking them to make a change, to stop doing something or to start doing something else. And that's, when you think about it, there are a lot of ethical implications about that. You need to make sure that what you're asking them to do is what's best for them. That the goals are noble, right? That if you're asking somebody to stop doing something and it's something they enjoy doing, you need to have good reasons for that, right? So different types of persuasive speeches. There's a speech to influence thinking. So sometimes you just have to try to persuade people to think differently. You're not asking them to actually do anything differently. You're not asking them to take action, but you just want to change how they think about a topic. And that can be a very, very important, powerful step to take. And something that I'll note throughout this lecture is that you have to change how people think before you can change how they act. Then a speech to motivate to action, right? Make this phone call, vote for this person, take this next step, enroll in this program, right? Volunteer, to serve as a counselor, attend this event, right? We want to motivate action. And for each of these goals, right, whether you're going to influence thinking or you're going to influence action, there are different ways to go about that. So a sample purpose statement, a specific purpose statement on a speech to influence thinking: to convince my audience that homophobia is wrong. You shouldn't be afraid of people who have a different sexual orientation. You shouldn't discriminate against them, right? And for some people who have real strong convictions, maybe they're based on how they were raised or religious views or whatever, they think homosexuality is a sin, it's a terrible thing, it brings God's wrath on our country or whatever. There's no way you're going to get that person to, support a candidate who wants to expand rights to people of the LGBTQ community, right? Until you change how they think, learn, teach them, help them learn to see people differently and to think about people differently before you can get them to act. To motivate to action, right? So to persuade my audience to register for COMS 2302 group and organizational communication. See, there I'm asking you to take a specific action, to do something specific, right? So that's a speech to motivate to action. So when you're going to try to motivate your audience to act, what do you have to do? Well, you got to tell them specifically, precisely how you want them to act. Get out of the abstract and into the concrete. So call for precise action. Tell them where you want them to meet you to join in this march, the letter that you want them to write, the petition you want them to sign, the candidate you want them to vote for, right? There needs to be a precise call to action. It can be as simply as asking them to raise their hand if they affirm to act on what you've said, getting them to stand up. Studies show that when you get people to make some sort of public, ritualistic type of expression of their assent, they're more likely to follow through. So get people to stand up if they agree with you, or to raise their hand if they agree, and something like that. So, and that's what we're talking about here with get a response. Ask them to make a phone call, sign a petition, ask for a show of hands, have a sign-up sheet for volunteers. Have something ready so that when you call people to act, they're able to act, right? Now, you got to keep your emotions in check. Y'all remember the speech that we watched of Phil Davison here in class, right? He was passionate, right? But you got to control your emotions, right? You can't come across as hostile and angry and as someone who's off their meds, right? You're not likely to persuade people if you do that. You want to avoid undue pressure, right? Strong arm tactics, right? Like we say, you're twisting my arm, right? So you don't want, make your case. You want to make your case, give the best evidence that you can, call on people to act, but then, make your pitch and then let them make the decision for themselves. I think about, of course, with my background, I grew up going to church, and my mom taking me to church, and sometimes it would seem like the preacher just did not want to stop preaching until somebody got saved, right? And it was like this extra pressure that you just kept asking, for someone to come forward and give their life to Jesus or whatever. And we would sing another verse of a song to try to get people to come forward. Nobody come forward. So the preacher says, oh, no, somebody needs to. And he'd be looking at maybe somebody he knew had been involved in some stuff they shouldn't have been involved in. And let's just sing one more verse. I feel like the Spirit's moving and somebody's going to give their life to Jesus today. And, finally, somebody will just walk down and ask for prayers just so, they can say the prayer and go home. Avoid undue pressure, right? Don't look at someone too long, because you're like trying to get them to move and act when they're not. Conduct yourself ethically. All right, so let's talk about how do you organize a persuasive speech. All right, what are the structures of organization? One is called the motivated sequence, or Monroe's motivated sequence, and it involves 5 steps, right? And their attention, need, satisfaction, visualization, and action. And I have an acrostic. You can come up with your own, but all nuts should visit Alaska. All right, all nuts should visit Alaska. And that stands for attention, need, satisfaction, visualization, and action. And basically, this is how you structure your speech. You begin by getting people's attention, and then you explain to them the need. Then you explain to them how that need can be satisfied. Then you visualize it for them. You either explain how the solution that you have has been done in other places and help them see how it was effective. Or, you help them, you visualize the problem being solved for them so that they can see it as something that can work. And then you call them to action. You say, okay, so, sign up, write the check, right? Vote for the person, right? Volunteer, sign my petition. Just an example of that, I've used this pattern many times to talk to people about the adapted sport of power soccer. I know I've mentioned this in class before, but power soccer is an adapted sport for people who have physical disabilities that require them to be in powered wheelchairs, right? Motorized wheelchairs. And so these are quadriplegics, people who can't really use their arms or their legs. Lots of times, people with cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, spinal cord injuries, and they have to have a motorized wheelchair. Well, what about a sport for them to play? So the way I'll do it is I'll start off with this attention, and I'll talk about, and I'm not giving the speech right now, I'm telling you how I give the speech, but I start off by talking about the importance of sports in American culture, and how sports is such a big part of our society, and there's a lot of peer pressure to play sports, especially when you're a young kid, and to compete. And so then that leads to the need, right? What about people who are in wheelchairs? And I show a picture like this, and I say, imagine what's going through this young man's mind right now as he's looking out on that field. Man, if I could walk, if I could use my arms and swing a bat, I'd play baseball, right? So we could all agree that there's a need for people like this young man to have opportunities to play sports, right? To feel that longing, right? To play a sport. Well, the good news, right, is there is a competitive team sport for people like that young man, and it's called power soccer. And here I show a picture that I actually took of a couple of athletes in competition. And this is the part where I would explain how the sport is played, right? With the power chairs having foot guards attached to them, with an oversized ball, and how they use the power and the torque and their skill of controlling their chair to maneuver the ball, just like a person playing soccer running up and down a grass field would use their legs. And then they play on a basketball court with goals underneath each goal on the end lines, and they're trying to get the ball through the goal. It's very much patterned after the soccer that most people are familiar with, right? And so I explain how there's an organization called United States Power Soccer Association. There's even an organization, an international one called Federation Internationale de Power Chair Football Association, FIPFA, of which I'm the director of communications for. And so we've organized the sport, it's growing, and it's there, right? And so for the visualization, I can show a video, I can tell stories about how power soccer has changed the lives of many people and vastly improved their quality of life. And I'll show a picture like this one, which is a picture of my son's power soccer team. And this was the first trip that they took. My son is on the left of your screen, I believe. He's number 22 on the end, given the peace sign like this. That's my son, Ryan. And this was his team, the Tidewater Piranhas from Virginia Beach, Virginia. And this picture was taken probably in, I think, 2008, in the spring of 2008. And it was the first trip that they had taken to play in a regional tournament. And it was down in Atlanta, Georgia. And you can just see the smiles on everybody's face. And this was when the sport was new. And you can see they've got these plastic foot guards that teams don't use anymore. They use metal ones because it's more competitive. But the point is, man, for someone who had longed to play sports and love sports, to finally have a team and to be able to go and compete, it was just life-changing, right? And don't you want to be a part of something like that? Don't you want to be a part of helping people find something like this and get involved in it? And so the call to action, right? And so the last university where I was in the U.S. was Nicholls State University. And this picture was snapped when we did a clinic to start a power soccer team on campus. And so you can see me standing on the end on the right side in a red t-shirt, and we signed up our first players. But basically for this step, I would have an event scheduled. And I would say, you know, if you want to be involved, come to our clinic on Saturday, May 13th, or, you know, I just made that date up off the top of my head. But you would have a specific call to action where people, a way that people could get involved, could come, could see it, invite them to a practice, ask them to volunteer to go out and spread, you know, hand out flyers about it. Could invite them to volunteer to be a coach or a coach's assistant, and ask them to take a packet that I've put together that includes a flyer, maybe a DVD, a link to some YouTube videos or whatever about the sport that they could then take and give to friends and family members. So I'd have a specific call to action. So there you can see how the motivated sequence would go from attention to need to satisfaction, visualization, and action. And this is just really a great organizational pattern, a way to organize your thoughts to speak persuasively on a topic. Another organizational pattern is, and it's one that's real familiar, is the problem solution. You start with a problem, and then you define that problem, you give examples of that problem, you make people really become convinced of how big of a problem this is and that we need to do something about it. Then you tell them, okay, here's what we can do about it. And you try to convince them of the solution that you have for it. All right. So the problem could be assaults. The last university where I taught in the West Indies, we had a problem of a couple of students getting held at gunpoint or knife point, and I know that's happened at TSU as well. So it's a universal problem. And so we could just establish that the problem of lack of security, of increased crime on the campus, give statistics, give examples from the news, and then we would talk about our solution. And maybe we would have a three-pronged solution. Maybe we would say we need to increase the amount of security guards or patrols, and that's actually a security guard standing in front of a building on the campus at the University of the West Indies where I was. We could say we need better lighting and that we need fencing. So there might be other solutions, but this is just an example. All right. You can give a statement of reasons pattern. And basically for that, you just have a specific purpose statement that's something like, to convince my audience to quarantine themselves during the COVID-19 pandemic. Stay home. Rhetorical question is, or the thesis could be something like, staying at home is the best way to end the COVID-19 pandemic. Rhetorical question would then be, why is staying home the best way we can end this pandemic? And then you would say, your key word would be reasons, and you would give a statement of reasons. Each main point would be a reason why people need to stay home, right? And that's a message that really needs to get out right now, wouldn't you agree? So in this example, I had a student one time give a speech about why we need to increase funding and continue funding NASA. And this was back during a time when cuts to NASA were being made. And, there'd been a couple of space shuttle tragedies, and people were beginning to question things about NASA. But basically, they said because, humanity's always had the first reason was because how space exploration satisfies our need for curiosity. It's the final frontier, to borrow that phrase from Star Trek, right? And it's something that, we're curious and we need to know, right? The second reason could be, I think this person made the case that we need to explore outer space because We might find important resources out there, ways that we can use resources in space that might provide alternative energy, might provide medicines, so on and so forth. And then the third reason they gave was, at some point in the future, if we keep destroying our current planet the way we are, we may, need to relocate to another planet. And so perhaps getting out there and trying to find another planet that would be conducive to human life and support life, we might have a reason to be looking for that. And so that's a statement of reasons. Comparative advantages. So another way to try to persuade people to do something is to give benefits or to talk about the advantages of something, right? And that makes them, when they compare what you're talking about to what they're currently doing or what the other options are, and you convince them how this one is advantageous, has more benefits, then you're going to persuade them to do that. So an example could be trying to convince people to eat organic foods instead of conventional foods that are raised with conventional methods, right? So what would be the advantages? Well, one advantage, the first advantage that you could say, is that organic farming doesn't use the kinds of synthetic, harmful, cancer-causing chemicals that much of the industrial, conventional farming uses. And so, you're not getting as much harmful chemicals and pesticides in your food. Second advantage is organic produce tastes better and is more nutritious. And that's because the conventional food has been genetically modified and engineered so that it gets big and it's bright and stays on the shelf for a long time without going bad. It's not grown with flavor and nutrition as the priorities. So organic food can be more nutrient dense and more flavorful because of the way it's produced, and it's not genetically modified to be sitting on a grocery shelf for a week before somebody buys it. And then a third advantage could be it's more sustainable. The methods, it's better for the environment. So the example of not using pesticides, we know that using pesticides, in particular using Roundup, is killing honeybees. I mean, honeybees are really, really in crisis, and and basically we'd all starve to death without honeybees, right, to pollinate all the crops of the world. And so, and it's just better for the other animals, it's better for the environment to use these sustainable methods. So there you go. So now just some general tips. Begin with less controversial points. So when you're trying to persuade somebody to do something, the first thing you want to try to do is establish some common ground. Try to get them to agree with you. So you don't want to start with your most difficult point, right? With the point that would be the hardest one to sell, okay? So I'll give you an example. Let's say you're wanting to persuade people to take up reading as a hobby. All right, my wife, for my birthday was 3 days ago. Yeah, and she got me the complete set of the Harry Potter books. I've never read them. I've never, in my life, I've not had a lot of time to read just for pleasure. I've read a lot of academic books and reading for research and things, and so she bought me this. She wants me to be able to read just for a hobby, for the enjoyment of reading. And let's say that that's a speech that you want to give. So in your 3 points that you're going to make is that reading is enjoyable, reading is profitable, and reading is inexpensive as a hobby. So the question is, what's the best order for these three main points? What should be the first main point, second main point, third main point? When you think about trying to convince the audience and starting with the least controversial point, what's the point that nobody can disagree with? Is it that reading is enjoyable? No, right? How many of you would say, I hate to read? You know, I hear that all the time from college students. So you could not start with reading is enjoyable because that's the one that most people would disagree with you on. Reading is profitable. What do you mean reading is profitable? You know, they're not likely to go with that. But what about reading is inexpensive? See, just talk about the economics of it and talk about how anybody can go to the library on campus and rent a book for free, right? You can get a membership at your public library, rent a book for free. You can go to the Goodwill or thrift stores and buy books all day long for $1 a piece or less, right? So whether you like to read, whether you think reading is profitable, we can all agree that reading is cheap to do. It's inexpensive, all right? So that would be the point to start with, right? Reading is inexpensive. Make that point. Then that sets you up for a great segue to say, not only is reading inexpensive, but would you believe it if I told you it's also profitable? You see how that makes a nice transition? And then you share your evidence, right? How and this is true. What I'm sharing with you is our actual facts. That studies show that people who read regularly are more productive and do better in their careers. They get more promotions and they're in positions, higher level positions. And part of that is because when you read, you're informed, you follow, you know the instructions and you follow them, you read the manuals, right? And you have more knowledge that you can apply to problem solve, et cetera, et cetera. So it makes sense, right? But people don't think of that. And then you see, you can say, so reading is inexpensive, it's actually profitable. And you know what? You just might find if you start reading because it's inexpensive and because it can help you in your career, because it's profitable, you might just find out you like reading after all. Yes, reading can be enjoyable. And so that's how that speech would go. Right? So you start with your least controversial points. Okay? Don't shadow box. If everybody already accepts the point, don't belabor it. Right? That's where you need to know where your audience stands on issues before you give your speech, right? Otherwise, you're just up there shadow boxing, and shadow boxing means you're fighting in it, you know, somebody who's not fighting back, right? So they already agree. So instead of trying to persuade somebody of what they already believe, spend your time on focusing on the action, right? People already accept that this is a problem, then you don't need to focus on the problem, focus on the solution and sell them on the solution. If they already accept that this is the solution, then focus on the actions to take to implement that solution. Remember, you got to change thoughts before actions, okay? People are gonna, you might have the power, you might be in a position of authority and control, maybe at work, you're a boss or whatever, where you can force people to do something a certain way. But if they don't really believe it, if they're not really on board intellectually, right, and accept it in their mind, they're going to do it, but they're going to begrudge you. They're going to be passive aggressive. They may even sabotage. And in the end, it's not going to accomplish the goals that you really want it to accomplish. So focus on selling the ideas, right? The thoughts, changing those before you try to change how people act. Remember that the audience must first feel a need for change, okay? And I put feel in quotation marks because this is talking about pathos. You can't just focus on the brain and the intellect and the numbers, right? The logos. You have to bring in the pathos. You got to make people feel the urgency and the need for change, right? tug on the heartstrings, make them feel something. They may accept that, okay, yeah, I agree this is better, but they don't personally feel that it applies to them or that they need to change, right? Audience has to believe the change is possible, all right? And let me apply this to what I just said a while ago in the example of eating organic, right? Well, we all know that organic produce is more expensive, right? And so if I give that speech, but people don't believe that they could afford to eat organic, right? Then even if they're convinced of my points, they can't act on it, right? So you got to make people believe that it's actually possible for them to do what you're doing. And so, for example, if I were talking about organic and going organic, then instead of, I would point out to go to farmers markets and to start your own container gardens and things like that, instead of, paying double the price for organic in the store. However, you can find those on sale and for reasonable prices in the grocery store as well, because it's becoming, there's more of a consumer demand for organic produce now. But the point is, people have to believe that change is possible, right? That there aren't structural, political, ideological walls that would prevent the change from happening. All right, so this is where you have to sell the vision, right? That it's possible, it can happen, and you got to give them examples and help them visualize, right? Tell the stories about how it was impossible until it wasn't, right? Use we instead of you, all right? So use we. This is what we need to do. This is what we need to change, instead of saying you need to do this and you should do this and you. You don't want to come up there as, as if you're patronizing the audience, or as if, you're condescending because you got it all figured out and all in order, and they need to make all the changes. So include yourself as a part of the audience. We're all in this together, all right? Be careful of shoulding on the audience, right? And I used it intentionally in the last bullet that I gave about you should, right? Try to change your language and be mindful of avoiding telling people what they should do. You could say you could talk about what we need to do, what is needed and why it's needed, and talk about the benefits and the advantages, but lay off the you should do this, and putting that kind of pressure that people would resist, right? Don't tell me what I should do. You see, balance the pathos and logos. I've already kind of hit on that. You got to talk to the mind and the heart, right? They both have to be involved. Again, specific call to action. You can't just say, we need to do better, okay? We need to do more than we're doing, okay? Those are generalizations. You got to tell people exactly what can we do that would be better than what we're currently doing. We should do this instead of this, right? Be specific. Use good arguments, avoid logical fallacies. Okay, build solid arguments with evidence. Don't build on unproven assumptions. Assertions must be backed up with evidence, with proof. And I'm going to have a second video just on logical fallacies. So I'm not going to say any more about that right now. And then give examples and tell stories to drive home your points. And this is where this helps you balance the pathos and logos too, because stories involve the pathos, right? So tell stories, right? If I'm talking, to go back to that example about power chair football, I'm going to tell the story about my son, right? And the difference in his life and his demeanor and how it gave him something to live for, and the joy it brought to us as parents, right? To be able to put, soccer logos on our minivan, right? That had a handicaps sign on it, right? And so stories that inspire and that get people to want to see these stories spread and become a reality for other people. All right, so there you have it on speaking to persuade. And I wish you the best as you continue to shelter in place and avoid the coronavirus and work on your persuasive speech. And I'll be right back with a lecture on logical fallacies.